We are live, and we are going to be discussing something that we've kind of been putting off on discussing for some time. I'm sure we've all heard that over in the UK, we've got a new left party potentially in formation. Your party. That is still the name. Potentially going to be changed, but this is uh, this is the new thing. You got Jeremy Corbyn, and whether it's going to be his triumph or not, whether he's going to be leading this thing seems to be up in the air. But yeah, so we're going to be covering what's going on with your party, the founding Congress, give some background for people, and maybe even give some inside information on what's going on behind the scenes, the stuff that you're not going to find out about from Novara Media and Owen Jones. Joining us today, we got Bryce Bailey, who is part of the Democratic Socialist Your Party Executive Committee. He's also a member of RS21 and the Marxist Unity Caucus. And we got Charlie Porter, also from the Democratic Socialist Caucus, and is an organizer and convener for the Founding Conference Working Group, and is also a member of the Marxist Unity Caucus of RS21. So we got some very big players joining us today, some movers and shakers of this exciting party building venture going on. And I think we're going to have a very informative session today. So welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to Cosmocast.
Nice to meet you, comrades.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. So we all have a lot of questions. We're going to have audience questions coming in as well in the chat, so prepare for that. But I think the first thing I wanted to kind of ask to launch this whole discussion was maybe what is the background to this venture, this Your Party venture, and why did you guys kind of choose this as the intervention to focus in on, as opposed to maybe joining the Greens or joining I don't know, some other party or whatever. What's the pitch for this as the party building project in the UK right now?
Yeah, do you want me to lead on the background of your party, Charlie? Yeah, so Corbyn, after the 2019 general election, where it's seen as Labour having a very bad defeat, despite them getting a huge amount of votes, but one of their worst results in seats in decades. He quickly resigns, but stays on until he's replaced for the election for a new leader of the Labour Party. And in April 2020, he's replaced by Keir Starmer. And then, in October, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission published a report into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and Keir Starmer suspends Corbyn as a Labour MP. Yeah, so since then, this is seen as like quite a watershed moment for the left because of the left in Britain kind of having like this left populist, attraction to Jeremy Corbyn and his politics, which had functionally left the UK, led the UK left since 2015. People are so excited that when he sets up this NGO called Peace and Justice, soon after being kicked out of the suspended from the Labour Party as an MP, they think it's going to be the new party, but it turns out it isn't, basically. So basically there's this whole process of secret negotiations since then, from 2023 into forming this new thing. But in terms of how it came about, there was the collective group that was having these secret negotiations with organisations, bringing a whole bunch of the UK left together. There was this MOU group, which was another thing as well. But eventually, when Zara comes in, she announces that there's going to be a new party. There's a huge amount of excitement about. Eventually, 800,000 people join a mailing list that's put out around your party. Um, but yeah, of course, there's been a lot more problems since then. But I would just argue that like the reason why I think people are still excited about your party is because of like the level of ideas on the left that are being discussed. I mean, you're seeing a lot of engagement on the ground from organisers, from factions like Democratic Socialists organising for popular power, um, Democratic Bloc, and all these sort of things, coming up with new ideas of how the UK left should be organised. You know, in comparison to the Greens that seem to sort of be doing Corbynism again with Zach Polanski, if that makes sense. I think that's that for background. I was about to go into the whole history of it, but I think I'll leave it there.
No, that's all good. That's all good.
Yeah, just on that sort of bit of background as well. The moment when Zara Sultana joins the process as this sort of like a much younger MP, hasn't got this long career in Parliament that Jeremy Corbyn has, and I think part of the sort of fallout from that is visible in his politics. Is this sort of his coalition has always been other members of Parliament. He's very much used social movements to justify his personal politics, but has never sort of been the democratic mandate and democratic organisation that he's been within is the Labour Party. So he's sort of connected this extra parliamentary movementism to a internal Parliament culture and organising culture, which when he's often historically landed on the correct side, I'd argue, on social questions. But the way that he's then advanced those social questions has always been through Parliament, and that means a lot of like horse trading and that sort of thing. That you have to build coalitions based not on politics but on personality and stuff. So Zara Sultana's entrance into the process, and she is an MP as well, but she's a much younger MP. She's clearly come from this school, so part of it is still this sort of this parliamentarianism, where she's joined this process and been frustrated about the pace of launching a new party, and instead she joins, and within, I think I can check my note, within about a month of joining this process, she unilaterally announces that she is involved with Jeremy Corbyn to launch a new party that they're going to be co-leaders of the founding process of. And there's been some really good reporting about the fact that this wasn't exactly what had been agreed, and different groups had sort of withdrawn from processes, and different coalitions and cliques and had been discussing things. But I think this became a running theme throughout the founding process of Zara Sultana quite unilaterally announcing things, and then to a greater or lesser degree, Corbyn's team following. But so why this intervention, not the Greens? I think it's worth saying that this process was started just before the sort of Zach Polanski leadership bid had been ramped up. He'd been sort of speaking left, and the Green Party had been growing, and it's grown to over 150,000 members last time I checked, possibly even more than that. It's worth remembering that I think as late as 2015, Zach Polanski was a member of the Liberal Democrat Party, which is the sort of centrist party that's in Britain, and he's and apparently he was pushing to be a leader of that party with it, and when he was in there as well, and has got this sort of I think quite a lot of personal ambition, which is no bad thing. But I think that I'm personally quite cautious about that being able to sort of that honest left-wing intent from Polanski. And also, the fact that the Green Party itself, it doesn't whip its elected officials. So Green-run councils in places like Brighton have been known for breaking strike actions. They've
Local
Green-run,
austerity as well.
yeah. So that's a Green-run
Yeah.
council known to sort of implement cuts and austerity. And when in power, they've got this historic thing of when in power, just exactly acting like every other bourgeois party. So I think what we've needed in the UK is like not only a decisive break with Labourism, but also to fundamentally question about this point of taking power whenever it's offered. I think your party offered. Again, I also absolutely hate the name. It's actually quite embarrassing to say. But your party, the New Left Party being set up by Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, offered this sort of a potential decisive break with Labourism, but also with the electoral politics that we've seen from the British left in the past 20 years, 30 years, even longer.
Yeah, I think one way the Archie Woodrow article in Novara put it was that Corbyn is very much from this Labourite tradition where politics isn't done in the open. It's done in the shadows between big personalities. And then in between these sessions, behind closed doors, you'll get announcements by these big personalities to tell us the kind of deals and decisions they've made. And that's kind of how it all works. It's not this kind of out in the open, messy process of actual deliberation and discussion that we would like to see. So I think and I think Corbyn probably wasn't, down for the kind of actual democratic mass politics that I think a lot of the people who were excited about your party were, actually trying to fight for.
I think he's lost any idea of how to do it. I mean, this is someone who was like historically a Bennite and comes from that tradition. But I think, going through this process and probably also going through like leading the Labour Party and having all that media pressure on him, and then also then getting, basically purged from the party he'd been in like, most of his life. I think since a teenager. I think there's just a way of politics that he's lost the training to do, basically.
So could I?
Hey, go ahead, Joseph.
No, I just wanted to ask, like, what, as someone from the outside looking in, what do you guys actually make of what the difference between the factions are? Well, the leadership factions in this case, the Sultana wing and the Corbyn wing. Because so far, it seems to center on an organizational orientation. Sultana seems to think or believe that it should be a more open organization, member-led and driven, and Corbyn seems to think more or less that it should be a redux of the Labour Party. But other than that, what politically is animating the split between them?
It's actually really complicated because, like, at the start of the process, Corbyn wanted a kind of federation of organizations, maybe a party or maybe just an alliance, and it was actually Collective, which was led by Carrie Murphy, Justin Schloesberg, I think. They were the first secretariats. He would later get replaced by Pamela Fitzpatrick, and I think Carrie Murphy and Pamela and Justin are all actually, I do think that they're socialists, but their idea of organizing a party is very Labour, right? Carrie's very used to backroom dealing and backroom ripping, basically, make sure things are going in the right way. So Collective, after like in the end of 2023 starts forming and starts having like these secret negotiations with the rest of the left in order to try and build this thing. And then after 2024 general election, which is seen to have gone quite well for the left, especially under the independents. There seems to be like consensus that there needs to be a new party, and that gets the ball rolling on this organisation collective, which then creates these kind of like para-party structures, and also forms as a membership structure as well, which still exists. So collective is like Carrie Murphy's circle, this para-party structure, and a membership organization that does actually have meetings and decides things as well. There are some people in these negotiations, though, that don't agree with this. I've already talked about Corbyn, but there's also Andrew Feinstein, Jamie Driscoll, and James Schneider would like a more local party-based approach with trying to do community outreach through assemblies, basically. So getting a whole bunch of people together to discuss their local issues. Collective kind of argues that, like, at this secret conference in January, end of January, they say that Corbyn will finally come out in favour of their party. He doesn't. So, and this is seen as like the last hurrah for collective, and a gang of four: Jeremy Corbyn, Andrew Feinstein, Jamie Driscoll, and James Schneider kind of get together, hold another secret meeting with a bunch of people from collective, and they kind of take over. They create this set of documents called the Memorandum of Understanding, which would be like this new party structure thing. So that's where eventually Memorandum of Understanding Limited would come from. They create an organising committee. At first, I think they kick out Carrie Murphy, but later Corbyn pushes for her to be back in. And yeah, that's how that process starts. And then
I
you
just want to
get
say,
to,
like,
Sorry.
this organization collective, it sounds like the Corbynite deep state. It's like it's like it's parallel secret meetings that are like deciding everything, you know, and then and they're like stabbing each other in the back. It goes Carrie Murphy in or out.
So these structures are also like embodied in actual separate legal organizations. Like the leadership physically splits themselves up into two organizations.
Yes.
Yeah, and they don't perfectly with the individual. So the Zara Sultana Corbyn split doesn't align perfectly either with the sort of legal bodies initially, and then it kind of coheres a little bit, and then it sort of separates and based on sort of personal beef, based on the. I think it's slightly skip ahead is this point when in September, when things are sort of the process has been announced after Sultana's unilateral announcement. There's a sort of bit of a delay, but then then Corbyn comes back together with Sultana and says, "Yeah, we are doing this." By September, this I think a lot of us on the ground as well are kind of thinking, what's going on? Nothing's actually happening. We're hearing sort of rumors. At this point, you know, we'd started organizing on the ground. We'd been sort of setting up the locally we've been setting up these things that have been termed proto branches. So setting the branch of the organization that doesn't exist, which obviously is hugely contested as to who's the legitimate representative of this process. But also nationally, the sort of the factions, the caucuses that start forming. But they legally separated out at the national level. The process had been separated so that one side controlled the data and the signups, and the other side controlled the money coming in. So that it baked in two separate legal leaderships, so that they held each other hostage, effectively. But then Sultana sort of unilaterally announces a membership portal, for your party and then takes money to sign up. And I remember as I signed up, there was this weird sort of this message on WhatsApp that kind of read like a please repost this so Facebook sees it boomer complaint that says you have been hacked or something like that. But the message came from someone who was reporting that this sign up wasn't legitimate. As Sultana is tweeting, this is the real link. You can sign up here. Corbyn then puts out a statement saying this is a scam. Yeah, so clearly
I remember this, and I was just like, "What the hell is going on?"
This
over
is a
there,
massive
man?
mess.
yes,
And the weirdest thing is what like Charlie said about them it being personal beef. I mean, Zara and MOU are on the same side at this, but MOU want a federal party structure, while Zara wants a centralized structure around like her as one of the co-leaders, while Corbyn wanted a federal structure, but is aligned with collective. So it's all this like personal beef rather than like principled political disagreement. But there we go.
Mhm. And what was the reaction of the general public or like normal workers to this? Because that it sounds like in order to actually parse the political differences, you need to have extensive background in the personal relationships of these people.
So I think the launch of the unilateral launch of a membership system, I think, was the point when the party went from this 800,000 signups potential mass membership organization, which had internal strife amongst the membership. There's sort of may come back to this at some point, but there's quite a stark generational divide within the party as well. But I think the point at which things went from we can have a party of a few 100,000 to we've got a party of a few dozen thousand was the unilateral launch of the membership system by Sultana, which people felt was a massive overreach and a massive gambit that just didn't work out. I think Sultana had been emboldened by the initial gambit of launch of announcing the party unilaterally that had been a success, because and her membership system was a better membership system than the one that was eventually launched. But I think that the amount of the trust that was lost immediately then, and that by this point the Greens had elected Zach Polanski, and he was coming across well in media, was speaking left, and I don't think there's much of that. We've lost a lot in Britain, I think, particularly with the sort of crushing of the trade unions, of what it actually means to be involved in a democratic organization. For most people, that would be a completely novel process. I think a lot of people think that a political party is like a consumer good, or it's like an Instagram account that happens to have some MPs. So I think that if your party as a political choice as a doesn't look as appealing as the Green Party did, if you want to see left-wing politics or left-wing talking points being announced, being said by someone is the leader of a party. So I think that was the point when this sort of instinctive left group split off and went a lot to the Greens, or a lot just sort of this largely apathetic political process. So unless Bryce, do you think that's fair?
I mean, one of the problems is like for all the criticisms we can make of Zara, she went out and she announced it and she did the thing, while this process had gone on for so long. And Corbyn, Corbyn Collective / MOU needed to announce a new party before Zach Polanski announced his leadership, basically. And I think it was only like 5 days before the Greens leadership election ended before Zara even announced your party or something like. I'm hazy about that, but basically the Greens were already the Green left, Greens organised, were already doing some really good organising in terms of like popularising Zach Balansky and raising his profile and running like a positive campaign, while your party still hadn't even been announced yet. And then like it still took them a long time once Zara did announce it for them to get their act together. And of course, there's the membership portal Fiasco as well.
I think for me, one sort of final thing on this is that the party was launched, and then with this group of the Independent Alliance MPs, who were, I think, what put into sharp focus for a lot of people on the left was the genocide in Gaza. We needed a new party because the party of Labour was complicit in this genocide, was selling weapons to Israel. So there's been this mass social movement in Britain, led through sort of more official organisations like the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and the now prescribed group Palestine Action, and these that covering different scope ends of legality. But what wasn't there was a political party that could take those demands directly to the state. In a sort of in an official parliamentarian capacity. So a number of independent MPs were elected on the issue of no complicity in genocide, and they were involved in founding of the New Left Party. But they too lacked a broader left politics, and in particular, Adnan Hussein was quite regularly involved in like transphobia, and was then seen with Corbyn quite a lot and working together. And Corbyn's answer was always, "We'll work together on the issues we agree on, and not work together on the issues that we don't," which has forced a lot of people which for many people was the point when they went, okay, that this party is willing to equivocate on transphobia. The Green Party have been consistently solid. At least they've been perceived to be consistently solid on tackling transphobia within the party. So people went to the Greens as well there. So I think there's this. I think the timing thing is massive. And if the party had been launched even a year before it, Sultana announcing the party was the absolute correct thing to do, in my opinion. It's just a shame that it took so long to get there because the conditions, the social forces had changed by that point.
Right. I think, yeah, sometimes you have to take initiative and break the rules and just go for it and just ignore the bureaucratic entanglements and the personal infighting and just, take initiative. But yeah, I think maybe one thing to cover is the kind of the Independent Alliance and how that falling out happened. Because I kind of remember what happened there. There was a falling out over the issue of transphobia, and I think that kind of touched issues of like, well, is this going to be like, are we going to do like the kind of like workerist, like social conservative, like economic populism thing, or like are we going to be like socially progressive, or are we going to like try to do both at the same time? And I feel like that was kind of that was the closest I could see to like an actual political difference in some of the public falling outs, I guess, over the whole thing.
Yeah. So
you go.
When the organising committee basically collapsed after Zara unilaterally announces the New Left Party, Corbyn sort of starts like freezing Zara out quite a lot. But then they need to come to some sort of accommodation over who's actually going to be forming this new thing. He actually rips up the co-leader proposal that the organising committee voted on and passed. That Zara had announced that they had decided that basically, and says that the Independent Alliance should steward this process. And I mean, part of the problem is that none of 4 of these MPs don't have a background in like socialist politics, and you know, again, I think Zara feels that she was being frozen out of the process as well. And then you have this big fight over transphobia when Adnan Hussein starts posting stuff, and it leads to this kind of cycle of him posting stuff, Zara responding, Zara saying, reactionaries shouldn't be in your party and things like that. And then I'm trying to think. Yeah, I'm a bit stuck there.
I think the thing as well is it's this other thing with this sort of like hollowing out of political engagement in the UK is that there's an expectation that there's different the expectations of like leadership within the party and the expectation of membership is being conflated a lot of the time. And people are arguing for sort of socially conservative views with it to be supported in the party, so that they justifying it through, okay, what if I'm door knocking and someone's got socially conservative views? Do I not want them to vote for us?
Right,
And of course, we want people to vote for us, but we should have different expectations of a voter, of a member, and of a leader.
Yeah,
And
exactly. We have similar arguments in DSA, honestly. Like, it's like,
yeah, and it's just constantly being replicated that people this sort of and the question just keeps going back to like, what is a party and what's it do? And it's a question that I don't think, and it's also part of the question that led us to sort of forming the Democratic Socialists of your party over the summer, that these questions weren't being considered. So we got together, a lot of us met through these articles that Max Shanley had been posting. He posted one that was towards a new model party. I think any sort of anyone in Mug might recognize some of the language in some of these articles. I think a lot of it been picked from a motion that was heard at the end of DSA convention, but not entirely certain there. But anyway, so we met and we started the basic sort of work of forming a faction that we tried to define what a party is legally and structurally, but also also what the culture is within that, and and ultimately the importance of having a program and what that does for a party that sort of defines it, and sets it, and from that we can start building these things around, like, what is an expectation of a member, what is an expectation of someone who is elected on to advance the program and the platform.
awesome.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear you both speak a little bit more about, that aspect, like more of like, because we've been discussing kind of the top down, the kind of internal factions, the various, parliamentary actors and some of their personal beefs, political differences, organizational differences. But I'm curious, like, Bryce, Charlie, like what your experience was like kind of on the ground, both in terms of like organizing these proto branches and organizing these kinds of factions. Like what did that kind of process look like for you? Like, how did you kind of like come into it, like at the kind of, within your communities?
Bryce, if you want to take the national stuff, I'll talk a bit about the branch, the proto branch experience. So I'm based in Sheffield, which is a former sort of steel work city. I'd say it's the Pittsburgh of the UK, if that helps. So we've got a tradition, quite a history of of left-wing parties, of the Labour Party in particular, and the miners' strike was around in the 80s. So there is this sort of like labourist history, and in particular across Yorkshire. So the forming the proto branch was fairly, it happened quite organically in Sheffield, I think, compared to other areas. The group who initially set it up wasn't a sect in the traditional sense. So they weren't one of. So a lot of Socialist Worker Party led proto branch has been happening, but R1 was set up by this sort of semi-independent local group who had been the Sheffield Labour Left and became the Sheffield Left. But they sort of set up a group chat on WhatsApp. WhatsApp has been, if you had shares in Meta, your party Fiasco would have, you'd be a millionaire. But so this group chat was set up in Sheffield. There's about 150 in the group chat, and then frustratingly with this labourism that sort of I think made it quite quick to form a proto branch to get 200 people in a room within days. I think this was early September when we met. We also then immediately did a Labour meeting. We did a constituency Labour Party meeting where everyone sat in rows and heard motions and argued, and ultimately those motions went nowhere. People argued about things that weren't relevant. People weren't there to do. I put forward sort of let's build some democratic structures in this thing. Let's sort of and people are arguing against doing the democracy a bit boring. They just want to get out on the streets and recruit people. I made the point of recruit people to what? And we had no program, we had no policies, we had no manifesto, we had no party. I arguing for a second and think, okay, what are we doing here to build the party? We've got people who have sort of come from Labour. We've also got this new generation of activists who weren't members under Jeremy Corbyn. And I thought it was great, really exciting time to do these things. And I think every time that it was raised that we should maybe stop and think about what we want the party to look like and how we can influence the process from our locality. Instead, people were pushing for this reflexive movementism, going, let's get out on the streets. So I respond with which streets? And who chooses that? And obviously it was groups related to this sort of and we can talk about the sects at some point in Britain, because it's our left is the history of sects is the history of the left in Britain, I think, for the past 50 years. But the sects that had more of a say and clearly were trying to use this, oh great, there's 200 people in a room, let's send them to one of our marches, let's send them to one of our rallies, let's get them to sign up to our things, were better prepared than people who wanted to stop and go, let's consider the situation here and what do we want to look, what do we want the party to look like? And the more we build a party, the less we're building a sect. So the sects, a lot of them were quite instinctively opposed to that as well. At the same time, they were probably correct in saying that if people don't do stuff together, then they're not going to be able to build something together. But that doing stuff together needs to have a point, otherwise people will feel like they're being tricked, in my experience. But Bryce, you're going to talk about the sort of national and the faction building stuff.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of your party factions, I'll talk, because I've organised in DSYP. I'll mostly talk about democratic socialists, but I know people organising in all of these different factions. So we have a strange lineage. We're almost like a Max Chanley tendency in terms of that he wrote in July towards a new model party, which made an interesting argument for a democratic socialist party inspired by democratic socialists of America. But it did this quite strange thing where he actually argued that DSA was more coherent and more centralized than it actually was. But it, by reading it and comparing it to DSA, he kind of gave you the confidence in believing that there could be a party like that here, basically. And that was the brilliance of his first article, and he wrote two more. His articles influenced a group of people around the Bristol left, some like ex Momentum and some ex community organizers who come and create a campaigning group that is first called the Fellowship and then called the Democratic Socialists of your party, a bit more sensible name to be honest. While Max Shanley organises his own group which is more of a membership organisation, but kind of around him, called For a Party Republic. A little bit before that, he himself does some a small committee of people, largely drawn from RS21, go and draw up this constitution as well, based off of DSA, which was a weird process. But then, yeah, there's this merger between For a Party Republic and Democratic Socialists. And it becomes this weird kind of campaigning caucus. So we've got this weird dual structure where you can be someone who's more of a supporter, someone who's a local member and can do local stuff. And then there's this national organizers group that is this smaller group of people. It's about 125 at the moment. But they're doing a lot of the onboarding into DSYP, but also things like drawing up our documents, responding to whatever's happening in terms of your party at any given point, which is often a lot because the Your Party HQ just announces things and we have to react to them. And yeah, it's been, I'd say it's been a pretty intensive process, but because we've had this vision of a democratic socialist party, almost a programmatic vision of what a party would look like. You know, it's actually motivated us to do a lot of organizing around that and giving us a clear vision of what the organizing would be for as well, and has allowed us to respond very quickly to changing events when it comes to your party. Yeah, and also, I mean, later on, he even, DSYP even drew up a programmatic document for the political statement of your party as well, which is interesting. I could probably talk about DSYP's organising within your party, if you want.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely something that people would be interested in. I think it is really interesting to me how DSA, this idealized image of DSA, becomes a blueprint for people to form a new organization, because DSA is a mess in a lot of ways, but it has produced new things and new thinking and new ideas. So I do see why people would look to it as something to emulate and something that has brought new life into the left in the US. And I think the fact that there's different caucuses and there is actually a democratic structure to it, I think is something that is genuinely, for a lot of people, something new, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think most people are aware that DSA is a problem of getting electeds in and finding it very difficult to whip them in any kind of way. But yeah, I
Right.
think the big inspiration is the high level of democratic debate that's going on in DSA at the moment, which we have not seen in the left in Britain for probably the CPGB in the 20s or something. Yeah. In terms of organising, yeah, it's been a lot of reacting to the process outlined by the Your Party HQ. So their lead up to the founding conference had 3 different aspects. The first were the assemblies. So they released a bunch of founding documents, and they were going to have this consultation process around them, and that had 2 aspects to it. It had the assemblies and the crowd editing. And so at assemblies, it was so the way they were organized was in a relatively close region to you would have an assembly announced, often organised by the people there, with someone from your party HQ to come down and lead the process, and then you'd be broken down into like these little breakout groups, and kind of only told to discuss a few different aspects of the founding conference, and it's up to the people facilitating what people are saying to write it down and give it back to your party HQ. So these weren't democratic kind of bodies that could have like had any decision making in terms of sending anything to conference to be debated or anything like that. But we still organised a lot around them, getting people into the breakout rooms to make the arguments, leafleting everyone there, getting people to facilitate as well, which was actually a really useful thing to do. And then in some places like Sheffield and Manchester, because they didn't have people on the ground, we straight up took them over because we were the ones, or like, well, DSYP and friends really, not DSYP itself. We were the ones like actually organizing the thing. And so we actually managed to get like some things voted on, and motions passed at these things, as well as doing things like little dotocracy things where people could like just vote with a sticker and stuff, which isn't like that important, but just shows something about what members are thinking. Yeah, and then the crowd editing. So they had this tool that they took from DM25, where you could edit the founding documents online, and that would feed into the process in some way. But I think it was actually a machine learning tool that was taking all these submissions and putting them through. But anyways, DSYP did a mass campaign to get its like members and supporters to like edit each founding document, and it really was like a process of like almost deleting everything that was there and adding our own stuff, but in a way that still makes sense for the fact how the founding documents presented, and
Right.
you have to do it in a way where it comes off like you've edited it rather than just copying and pasting. So it was a bit of a weird process. But yeah, I mean, both had like very limited ways of actually functionally changing this process, because it was like completely up to whoever was supervising the AI tool to take like the relevant and the AI tool itself, but to take the relevant suggested changes to the founding document and run with that. What happens? Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, I think it's been sort of it typifies the entire process really. Like it puts this thin veneer of democracy over processes that are going to happen anyway. I think that there's a general conflation of democracy with process rather than with power, and the process should facilitate the power being exercised. But ultimately, this wasn't a question. The power clearly was always with the queue, and we weren't really. It wasn't actually announced who those people were at any point. It was all based on rumor and leaks and things as to who actually is in charge of the processes. So these assemblies, a lot of people sort of were really pushing for them. And I there's sort of this like anti-hippie bias that where I assume an assembly is nonsense. But I actually do think they're a good participatory mechanism. But ultimately, the assemblies didn't have any authority and any power, so people felt like they were doing something. They felt like they were being heard. And what really you'd built is an unfocused group, like. We'd take issue with focus group politics. So why just put more people in a focus group? Because ultimately, clipboards who decide what's written down, decide what's sent in, and then and then even further still, separated from the process, someone is reading the clipboard and deciding which bits they wanted to have, to listen to or not listen to. And I think that then led to, I think what you're about to talk about there, Bryce, was the when we got the documents for the founding conference about half an hour before it started, it was. I want to talk about the motion process. I'll let you do that. But the amendment process for these founding documents, that they has clearly worked out what the most contentious issues were, and offered a binary choice of A or B on how you want to deal with those issues in the Constitution or in the standing orders, which ultimately was completely undermining the democratic input of the members, because you could work out what and the rules meant that you couldn't add anything. If something had been discussed in these A or B options, you weren't allowed to put a C option in. So you're able to arm the democratic left by saying, well, if you don't want option A, there's option B is there for you. And they were able to preempt the major contentious issues of the conference, in particular around dual membership, membership of so if you're allowed to be a member of another national political party, which was never defined anywhere, and was largely then clearly a tool for bureaucratic purges of opposition. The options were a full ban, or which had been in the initial founding documents, or this new option where there was a whitelist where a group could apply to the Central Executive Committee of the party to confirm that the group's orientation and values weren't opposed to your party, and therefore you're allowed to be a member of both of them. This is actually much more restrictive than even the Labour Party, which had a banned list of other. And the process has never been clarified as to how you would actually do that. But obviously, because they offered A or B, you couldn't have no ban at all as option C, because they said that was outside the rule according to the way they devised them.
So this is like the pre-Congress period, basically, we're here at. So, because in DSA, it's just so different than how things work in DSA, where you have, members submit resolutions. You got to get a certain amount of signatures, and then you have, the amount of votes that you get determines like whether they'll actually get heard at Congress. But it's not like that at all in DSA, where you have. And could you explain again how LLM, like how machine learning was being used? Because that was kind of confusing for me for a second.
It was never actually said, but this is one of the things.
Okay.
The process for the roadmap amendments, which what they came from the crowd editing tool, was imagine a constitution had been written up, but it looked a bit like Google Docs, but with less functionality.
Right.
So you edits other people were making, but you could take out a section and write in your own section. We think that what happened there was that was then sent to a LLM to then work out what the most sort of popular type of amendments and type of changes that was being suggested, which either could then be accepted because it was really popular, or disarmed and then turned into so that they knew to sort of cut in ahead of it before it became a really contentious issue at Congress. I think the DSA model of like a convention based on motions being submitted by members, and the convention itself being able to decide, you could overthrow the chair and turn over the arranged orders, and that's what I'm currently on strike, and I went to my union's congress earlier this year, and that's the process. And we've our democratic deficit within that is the conference itself is sovereign, and the chair is supposed to be facilitating. And that wasn't at all the case with your party's founding conference. And one of the areas where that was, and I think the same thing happened to these assemblies, that the notes written up by facilitators was then pushed into an LLM to similarly work out what was contentious, what was popular, and what was unpopular.
So it sounds like they were using the chat bot to reconcile everyone's different additions to this document. But if anybody who's been to like a DSA Congress or convention or whatever knows that you could get into the body can get into the weeds, making line by line edits on documents that could take an inordinate amount of time. That could be like a motivating factor for wanting to, cut through the work of doing that. But I would argue that that kind of defeats the purpose of the process. The purpose of the process is precisely deliberative. It takes a shit ton of time, but the point is that the entire time you're doing that, everyone has to clarify their opinions, and people have to argue back and forth, and that's how you achieve the reconciliation of the different opinions in practice. You're not going to do that through a chat bot, because a chat bot is not a part of the discussion. It doesn't have opinions. It doesn't actually do anything.
Well, you can't have a conversation at all with the crowd editing because you couldn't see what other people had edited. And you can't suggest changes to how they've edited stuff. So it's a purely, like, weirdly enough, the idea is supposed to be so inclusive, but weirdly enough, it's this incredibly alienated and isolated
Exactly.
process if you're just your party member, which is, yeah, the strange thing of it. Yeah. Weirdly enough, the motions process did kind of weirdly show what they could have done differently if they just done their original founding documents and then allowed people to submit motions. You could, and bearing in mind they only did this 5 days before founding conference. So 5 days before founding conference, they finally did a motions process where you could, so long as it hadn't been covered by one of their own roadmap amendments, which is how they cut off a lot of the stuff they didn't like. But on any other stuff that wasn't covered by that, you could write a motion on it. It would be published on the website, and then people could like endorse it on the website, so that the ones with the most endorsements might come to conference floor. If they started with like a motions process a couple of months in advance and allowed other people to like edit them and composite them, before the founding conference, and then like the ones that eventually that come out of that whole compositing process maybe like 2 weeks in advance, allow like endorsements. It's not the best way of doing it, but it was this online way of having at least like some actual say in over what gets discussed at conference. And they showed they were perfectly capable of doing that all the time, but decided to only let it happen 5 days in advance, and bundled that with the idea that you can't even amend a bunch of the most important constitutional issues of your party at the same time. It also meant that lay members didn't really have any time, because there's only like 2 days for you to actually submit motions. They barely had any time to look at the final evolved documents for your party, decide what their amendments were going to be and publish them. No time to double check, and a bunch of them were cancelled for typos, including one important one we'll talk later about. And then there was only a very small amount of time basically up until founding conference started for members to endorse them, basically. So that was also the kind of organising DSYP was doing in terms of the motions, like getting people to write what they a motion for us in terms of how it relates to our own like constitutional documents, how we can implement that in the thing, and then like choosing people to submit it themselves, so we can all back that rather than pushing in a load of duplicates, which would just confuse the process basically. So that's how we that's how we organized for that part of it. Yeah.
And it sounds like we're about to get into sort of a discussion of the actual proceedings of the founding Congress. But maybe before that, I would be curious to hear a little bit more about some of the sort of foundational principles of DSYP. I think we've discussed a lot about like the importance of like a member-driven Democratic Party inspired by the Marxist Unity Group's principles of party building. Charlie, I think that was the resolution at Congress that you were referring to earlier. But I'm curious, like, what the other sort of like key principles of that faction are, and maybe like we could talk about it in terms of like what motions were put forward and prioritized by the faction, and as well, like, were there other factions in the mix, and what were their motions that they were putting forward for this conference?
Yeah, so DSYP, we, once this merger had happened that Bryce mentioned, we very quickly got to the process of sort of getting together and actually debating what a party is and what a party looks like, drawing from those early principles, but also knowing and recognizing that our situation means that we were actually building a party here. This wasn't a hypothetical situation. We were coming from a sort of we're joining this long tradition of the far left in Britain that's always been small, but has always been like quite well, I was about to say theoretically advanced. But there's been a long history of arguments on the left in Britain, and we've got these points have been discussed and debated to the point where, okay, that at least I felt it was time that we actually put something into practice and said, look, we've got this opportunity here to design a party from first principles theoretically. We're not coming in with this previous baggage that we've come in. We're not coming in from one theoretical tradition, and we're not just doing a united front or a popular front or a popular alliance or whatever. We're not coming back and trying to agree on a theoretical level. We're not doing sort of this like really nitty gritty deep sort of unity. We're also not doing tactical unity. We've got an opportunity now to do this mid-range programmatic unity that required democratic structures to enable the broad and variegated left in Britain to try and shape something. So I think that's why we went to the DSA model, where we've seen like the convention this year. We saw much higher level arguments, much greater quantity and quality of sort of secondary literature from like around from the caucuses, from the factions, than we've seen in the British left for a very long time. So we've also got this opportunity where we could look at the Labour Party and go, this is what went wrong. And at this last opportunity that and many of us were members, many of us were there, and we could go, look, the way that you lobbied, the way you pushed for a particular change to the Labour Party policy was to build a campaign group called Labour something for something something. And you'd hope that you'd manage to you go to local constituency Labour Party branches, you would pass a motion, and eventually you'd sort of build this cultural hegemony and hope for the best, that it would go to the party conference, which wasn't sovereign in any way, because the Parliamentary Labour Party is completely independent. So we'd pass a resolution, pass a motion at conference, and the Parliamentary Labour Party had no reason, if they didn't want to implement it. So we saw those errors. We saw that what we actually wanted was something genuinely member-led. I personally feel like the greater amount of unfettered democracy you've got within an organisation, within a party, within a state, the greater amount of unfettered socialism you're going to have, or the greater tendency towards a sort of genuine socialist politics, which has people desperate. I think people do want that as well in the United Kingdom. We had 800,000 people sign up to a party theoretically led by Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, and then it was the personalities got in the way of that. So we wanted to stop this sort of personal politics. We wanted to build a politics of ideas and sort of debate and discussion. We put those forward as our principle, and we saw these certain democratic principles and procedures would encourage that and facilitate that. But ultimately, the party itself had to be member led, and genuinely so. And that also meant that we put forward a vision for a party that wasn't, transphobia is huge in Britain amongst sort of this, particularly an older left. I think that there's a potentially uniquely British level of transphobia that's just sort of particularly grim, that we're trying to export as well. So it's getting worse rather than better. The Labour Party has been sort of has sort of adopted a lot of the transphobia that we used to only see on the far right as well. So this thing of we're not going to have one section of the working class use the oppression of another section to get a foot up. So we've been pushing for a liberatory politics, a socialist politics, and ultimately, and that means also an extra parliamentary politics, not just focusing on elections, but also facilitating local branches to be well funded, to be able to be campaigning organisations. And I think a lot of us read an article by Salah Mohandesi in Viewpoint, which is Party's articulator. Is this potential sort of that we've got these social movements that build up and sort of burst, either because they win or because they lose. But that energy, that sort of collective organizational talent, the institutional memory just disappears, and it's not had this stabilizing force of a party for a very long time. And the Labour Party's just historically not been able to. Well, it was built to avoid having that revolutionary function. So we thought we've got enough history to build a party that could genuinely be that sort of to articulate the multitude of social struggles and social movements that were going on. So I think those were our principles. And that's what we designed the documents to do that. We've got hundreds of people signed up to our platforms. And yeah, there's work going on in different directions all the time.
And what about some of the other factions? Like, what are the other kind of tendencies that were represented, in your party in the conference and the motions?
Yeah. So to go through them, there's a Democratic Bloc, which I'd argue are like interested in the most democratic parts of the Labour Party, but I would still say they haven't broken from Labourism per se. There's Organising for Popular Power, which they're quite a sort of organising the movements, do a lot of local community work. They kind of want to organise local branches, but also do lighthouse work where they sort of do door knocking and finding problems with the community and build upon them. Then there's Trans Liberation Group, which is a group that's focused on trans liberation, but also has like a very strong democratic socialist politics as well. The DSYP is very close to them. There's Greater Left Manchester Caucus. This actually was like quite a strong Marxist Unity Caucus project, because they pushed the Manchester branch of RS21 to organise a left caucus, and then they brought in a bunch of different elements of the Manchester left into this, and it's like own functional thing with its own life, and has brought in a bunch of the Manchester left into it. But has also got like a good relationship with DSYP as well. And maybe one thing that it's stronger at is that it does have a local presence and has more in-person meetings as well, which is something that DSYP needs to go a long way towards to build until it can do that sort of thing. And then there's a couple of like nano factions as well. So there was Eco Socialist Horizon that have drawing up a minimum maximum program for transition into a green economy, which I think is a valuable project, because I think we're losing sight of the climate crisis with Palestine and the Your Party drama and all of that. There was a sort of not Maoist caucus that wanted to do social investigation, but I'll move away from them. There's a few people on this platform for a democratic party, if you know Naomi Windborn-Idrissi and Ken Loach, they're involved in that, but I think it's like a few people and a mailing list, but a lot of big figures on the left, well respected, and seem to do have good democratic socialist politics. Yeah, I'm trying to think. There's now a disability liberation caucus as well called Nothing About Us that started, I think, a few weeks ago as well. I think that's mostly it for the grassroots factions, Charlie.
Yeah, and then there's obviously this is Britain, so there are many different sort of Trotskyist sects of different size and influence who've been around for varying amounts of time. So in some areas of the country where the Socialist Workers' Party, the SWP, are strong, they've been building a lot of the branches, and then in other areas there's been sort of like compete across the country. I think the Socialist Party have been quite active, pushing for a closer link to the trade unions. As a proud trade unionist myself, I don't know why you'd want that, but
Yeah, no, I agree on that.
there's also some sort of like there's these different groups as well that have got quite a lot of influence in your party through sort of by setting up just before it was announced, really. So some areas like Andrew Feinstein's constituency, there's not really a local grouping so much as the grouping around Andrew Feinstein's former campaign to oust Keir Starmer. So it's all it's there's lots of different groups with different there's these grassroots factions that were formed in response to your party, but there's also groups that have been extant for a lot longer that have got a very particular way of organizing, a very particular vision for the party. I'd say like the Socialist Party are trying to rebuild this Labour rebuild Labour of 1981 or something, where there's a trade union block vote and things. And I've got quite strong criticisms of them. I think they didn't work the first time, and the Labour movement's even weaker than it was then. The other option, the SWP are doing things which through their multitude of fronts. They actually launched another front for a front a couple of days ago. Where
Very
they
SWP of them.
Yeah, so So they've been trying to use the branches essentially to push people into stand up to racism rallies, which then they get to become SWP members eventually. So that's what the model they've seen for the party, I think. But they were then on the eve of conference to sort of bring it back, unilaterally told some of the leadership were told on the train up to the conference that they'd had their membership suspended. One of the person who had his membership suspended was on a train with Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah,
had been told that he'd been kicked out and wasn't allowed to attend anymore. So it kind of threw into sharp focus for a lot of people things that many of us have been arguing, that this dual membership rule is functionally to ban the organised left, as we saw in the Labour Party, and we're proven right, and there's overwhelming sort of hostility, even though it only targeted the SWP, who are one of the most loathed groups in Britain, due to their historic cover-ups for rape and sexual assault, and the fact that they operate in this sort of secretive bureaucratic centralist model that is opaque to the outside world, and is really, in my opinion, not conducive to any sort of building of a proper left.
Right. And someone in the chat asked, what is your relationship to George Nasbel Galloway? So I'm guessing he's not involved in this project.
Yeah, he's not a big player at all.
Yeah.
Early on, so way back when 2023, 2024, George Galloway was in this weird position where he was actually organising Workers' Party for Britain, and in a sense,
Right.
he was getting on and actually organising a new party. But I mean, he's a historically contrarian figure, to put it mildly, and then he kind of doubled down on like the red brown stuff as he was organizing, and we had like this really contentious relationship with him in the 2024 general election, where like, do you try and not stand against them? Probably not even help them canvass for their candidates, really. It was very weird. I think I think he won a by-election and raised his profile a lot because, I mean, to be fair to him, he did campaign very well in that by-election.
Yeah.
But he lost his seat, I think, at the general election. Um, you know, I think there was a lot of anger over Gaza, and nobody campaigned well in the by-election, basically. But at the general election, the mainstream parties took it more seriously. And so he's not really been a big player. And I think the problem with this red brown stuff is that it's really just not popular with people. I mean, we saw with the like Sarah Wagenknecht break off from De Linke that she thought that she was gonna like both represent the left but also take a lot of votes from AFD. And it just didn't happen. People weren't interested in like if you're if you're if you've got like socially reactionary views, you're not really interested in like the light version of that. And if you are like left wing, um, if you're working with if you seem to be working with these reactionary forces, even if like you're a left winger with maybe like conservative views yourself, you're like, why are you working with Reform, or why are you working with AFD, etc. And it's just not. I mean, it's not works very well for Sarah Wagenknecht, and it's not worked well for George Galloway in the long run. He does keep trying to get involved, like atting Jeremy Corbyn, like let me get involved. Um, it, yeah, he's not a big player.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And it's like the whole like socially conservative left populism thing, or red brown thing. It's like it's one of those things where it's like you would think it would be popular based on the internet, but when it actually enters the real world, it doesn't go anywhere, which is funny. It's like, oh, well, polling says that this type of politics should be like super popular, and if you have like a socially conservative like socialist run, they would kill it in the elections, and then someone actually runs and doesn't really go anywhere.
They also had this weird incoherent politics, which you might have thought of if they were red brown. But I think part of one of the groups going into Workers' Party of Britain was like the CPGB ML, I think.
Yeah.
They were one of the people, but then they've split from him since, so they're not getting on. And at the same time, there's a bunch of all these different political questions that Workers' Party of Britain doesn't have a strong answer to, but I think a lot of their cadre do actually care about. So they just basically say that their program is basically to take power, to take over the state in a general election, and then like put everything to a referendum, basically. Like that was their program. They don't actually know what they're standing for. So yeah.
Solution is to let George Galloway fix everything.
It just seems like the worst form of populism.
Right. And we have another question. We can kind of move after this. We can get more into the founding conference and how that went down. And I would actually like to talk about the sortition question as well. But someone says, what is the interplay between RS21, MUC, and DSYP and these your party initiatives? And I think we've covered a bit of that earlier, but I think if there's anything you would want to add that might give a little bit more, shed a little bit more light on that question, go for it.
You want me to take this, Charlie?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So Marxist Unity Caucus come like early in the summer releases an article about you know, how should the left relate to this new party, or the, you know, the revolutionary socialist left? And it's for RS21, but then I think later published to a wider audience. That gains a lot of traction. But in RS21, in its summer all members assembly, it gets RS21 to back a set of principles. So anti-capitalism slash socialism, opposition to the British state, anti-imperialism slash the main enemies at home, and you know, anti-oppression. And a lot of these are, especially anti-oppression, are already kind of RS21 principles anyway. So it wasn't the most difficult thing to convince RS21 to back like a project of intervening into the Your Party, you know, project in this way. There's still a lot of procedural issues. RS21 didn't really work out how it should intervene in a more coherent way. So a bunch of different RS21 and MUC members have gone into these different factions, like DSYP, me and Charlie have been big in. A lot of them went to organising for Popular Power and have been involved in that. Greater Left Manchester Caucus was definitely like a MUC project that has brought in more people. And I think that's main of it. But like, yeah, RS21 has been involved in these different things. One person said to me, "You guys are a little bit in the the SWP, in that you have all these fronts, but you seem to be like arguing against each other in these different fronts." And yeah, I don't know. I thought that was funny.
That's interesting.
Yeah, none fronts as far as I'm aware. The sort of the activity is spread amongst different groups. We've got quite a few people involved in the Trans Liberation Group. You know, we're DSYP. There's a number of the exec committee that I'm not on, but Bryce is, are members of RS21 as well. And yeah, it's sort of RS21's sort of everywhere. Both the exec committee members who are in RS21 are also in the Marxist Unity Caucus as well. So there's a sort of DSYP and Marxist Unity Caucus, a bit of affinity there through those two members as well. So there's a broad range of activity.
Well, I think Marxist Unity Caucus wanted RS21 to build a communist caucus, basically. That was our main thing, because then RS21 could get involved in the Your Party project in one coherent way, while also bringing and keep all of its principles, while also bringing in a wider grouping of people. Yeah, but that hasn't really happened. So yeah.
Well, you know, who knows? Maybe down the road, mergers and fusions will happen.
Yeah, RS21 might have a merger process
We'll
with
see.
its different factions.
So, I think right now would be a good time to kind of move into the convention. So we talked about kind of the pre-convention period a bit, and how basically, you know, you said it was like only 2 days before a convention, you were actually getting the resolutions that were being voted on. And so how exactly were like how exactly did voting at the founding, like was it called convention or conference or congress?
Conference.
How exactly did like voting at the conference work? Because I heard that it was like they were experimenting with sortition.
So
Yeah, go on, Charlie.
so it's probably got a good idea. So between the two of us, Bryce was inside the conference, I was outside. The way that was selected was through sortition, which for those that don't know is like a sort of random lottery process to decide whether you can go or not to the conference. So there were no sort of delegates in any sort of real sense, because no one was delegated from something else. They were just there as individuals representing themselves. There'd been a bit of sort of there's been a strange resurgence in arguments, mostly coming from an academic called Edmund Griffith.
I know him.
Who has been arguing for sortition for every single thing. I think my grandma's getting sortitioned next week to be my aunt. It's like literally everything is being sortitioned. And then that process was selected by the head office, the headquarters of your party, to be the way that attendees were chosen for conference. The initial plan that leaked was having 13,000 sortitionees over the weekend, with sortitionees attending sort of either the morning or the afternoon of day 1 and day 2, and sort of splitting them across that way. And it's turned out to be a lot lower than I think they're expecting. And sort of, I think as we went into the conference, there's about 55,000 members of the party. The total number of sortitionees ended up being about 3,000.
2,000.
2,000 in a conference hall. I think there were some differences between day 1 and day 2, which I personally thought. So, if you're having a conference, surely you need to attend the entire thing to kind of cover what you're going to be talking about, cover the agenda. Well, the thing that sort of became quite clear about a week before conference, if you read the emails quite closely, was that being sortitioned and attending conference largely meant nothing at all, because you can have this brilliant representative conference, but it was essentially auditioned to go to a rally where you might be able to, you had the opportunity to speak if you're picked by a chair. But the conference agenda was sent out, the conference agenda was set, and the amendments and motions, they weren't motions so much as option A or option B a lot of the time, or sometimes up to 4 options, and you could go and argue for those different options at the conference. But being sortitioned, what didn't mean you could vote exclusively, because everyone could vote on their phones, which I thought the whole point of sortition was that you had people who are able to go to conference, be supported to engage with the conference process, be largely representative of sort of different demographics within the conference, and those people could be engaged properly without having to keep an eye on everything that's going on, so that they could make properly informed decisions when it came to the voting. The whole point of sortition is to have this sort of demographically representative sample going into the party decision-making bodies. The conference itself didn't have any of the sovereignty that would be required to justify the sort of the membership making those decisions anyway. And crucially for me, this is the most egregious point of all of this, in my opinion, is that they then just allowed everyone to vote on their phones anyway or online. I didn't go into the conference, and on either day, I was as engaged as Bryce, who was sortitioned, but I don't think I got a chance to speak at any point. So there was literally no difference. I was outside the conference. I was nearby because I'm a nerd and I went to Liverpool anyway. But yeah, there was this, and I think there's been, again, people engaging at cross purposes as to the point of all of these processes. There's people arguing in favor of sortition because ordinary people, rather than the sort of most advanced and engaged layer of activists, gets to go to the conference. I don't think gets to go to a conference is the way it should be thought of anyway. It's not a treat. It's a duty. But even if you accept this, that some sort of sortition process could theoretically grab this representative sample of all of the views, and also that each of the individual people going is sufficiently capable of engaging to the highest level and representing those views, which I think is impossible anyway at this current stage. Then having everyone vote online anyway completely undermines that entire process. So we've got sortition, and you get none of the benefits and all of the drawbacks, where the level of debate, I think some people didn't really know what motions they were speaking to. I think when they got up to speak, and obviously that happens at delegate conferences as well, but I think, people have to at least go through a stage where they're representing, where they argue at a local level to show that they're capable of bringing ideas to the next level. And yeah, so we had a sortition conference with none of the benefits of sortition, other than the fact that people got to feel like they were engaged. But I think if we keep running that process, people are going to realize that feeling like they're engaged isn't being engaged, and quite quickly going to become disillusioned with the entire sort of democratic sham that I think we've seen and enabled.
That honestly sounds like a very, very strange way of doing that. I've often heard arguments for sortition, but the arguments are sort of predicated on the people being sortitioned being full delegated members of whatever body they're being sortitioned into. I've never heard of this. I've never heard of this way of doing it. And it seems sort of specifically designed to render the body not sovereign. It seems to be that seems to be the. But my kind of question here is also at the conference itself, were the people that were there, the people who were sortitioned to be there, could they not introduce independent amendments? Could they not introduce motions to the floor of any resolution being discussed? Okay, so there's no process for amendments, motions, changing what was being discussed in any way.
It was completely up to the chair to decide the proceedings, and you couldn't interrupt the chair from the floor for any kind of thing. If you've heard of the Socialist Unity platform, they were like thinking about how to have an emergency motion read by Ken Loach or someone like that, because SWP had been kind of involved in those conversations. That's why they got like purged on the way up to conference. And yes, yeah, so there's no way of like intervening on the floor, and the standing committees, standing orders committee was actually in a back room outside of the conference hall, and you had to go to them to raise any problem that you had with the conference, and they would just sort of I mean, we did actually raise a few issues, but you know, there was nothing we could actually do on the conference floor without being super disruptive, basically.
So was that never a conversation that came up against with the left, sort of, I guess, I don't know, I should call them delegates or participants, I guess participants in this case, that never came up with the participants on the left of, well, let's make a disruption then and make the conference sovereign if it isn't.
So
yeah, go on.
this Socialist Unity platform was being brought together, which was sort of involved the Democratic Socialists, your party, as well as the CPGB sort of weekly worker side of things. They put a lot of effort into like bringing these groups together. And yeah, there was an emergency motion that was going to be brought to the floor. I think when these sorts of things were still being decided, this was before the rules were announced, you know, maybe about a week before the conference, because it actually wasn't clear up until a few days before what the processes were going to be, what the rules were. I think I'd raised this alarm, and so others had, but no one had really picked up that it didn't matter what the people on the conference floor decided, because voting was online anyway. They would make the case that if the constituency is every member of your party who's able to vote on their phone, that people raising their hands on the conference floor isn't a legitimate grouping. I think the conference floor attendees did lean a lot more left than was expected as well, which is part of the reason I think online voting may have been. I'm not sure on the exact order of whether they were always going to run it online, but the sortitioned delegates, I think, Bryce, you were told, is it 10 days before?
So there were 2 rounds of sortition. One was a secret round nobody knew of, that people were just decided to be. Then there was a second round. I failed that. And then when other people gave up their slot, that's when I got sorted. 1 week before.
Yeah, so there's this process of they told people you've been selected, and you can either accept it or reject it. I think that was sort of relies on a bit of nudge theory of these people may not have applied in the first place, but now they know they've definitely got a guaranteed spot. They should take it. Then there was a second round where people could apply to be selected, and then get it or not, and then eventually some sort of like gaps were filled based on. But the issue is the fact they delayed it so long. They actually started charging people to attend conference rather than what was initially being told that it'd be supported to attend. So you have to pay £10 per day, and also get yourself to Liverpool and get yourself accommodation for the weekend. I know my trade union congress when I went, which was in the same venue, my train ticket was covered, my hotel was covered, and I didn't have to pay to attend. So like it's completely anathema to the way that even the trade unions are doing things in Britain. But the issue with that is the only people who go are the people most committed to the project, because and not even then is the section of the group who the people most committed to the project who are able to take that weekend off work if they're working sort of weekends, shift patterns, people who don't have sort of caring responsibilities. So what they really opened themselves up to was different flavors of the Trotskyist left and friends going to a conference. So they immediately had if the conference floor was voting, I think we would have had a left landslide, and there would have been this these things like emergency motions would have gone through, or the conference would have been completely suspended. But the sort of organized democratic and the organized left who are interested in democracy and interested in sort of a proper political party were completely disarmed by the online voting thing, because there is a large enough contingency of people voting from home who and if that's your constituency, you can't get everyone. You can't get. There's about 10,000 people voting on each amendment or each resolution, so you can't get all 10,000 to register their disagreement with the process in any way because they weren't there.
In terms of like what people did to actually like disrupt the conference and assert a little bit of members' sovereignty slightly, a lot of people would make speeches when given an allotted time to speak for and against the thing, would make speeches. One of them was like denouncing the ban on dual dual carding. One of them, I think a couple were like SWP members. One particular one made like a pretty rousing speech and like ended it with like, and I'm a member of SWP and I got banned from the conference while at conference, and the feed was like cut. So the people who were supposed to be voting online weren't like seeing half of all the speeches that that were being made. DSYP itself had one amendment, one motion called the workers' wage. A few people had put motions for a workers, like capping party staff and elected representatives to a skilled workers' wage, inspired by the Paris Commune. Um, a few people put that motion in. Um, all but one were banned because they were duplicates, basically. And then the one that was allowed through had a pretty egregious typo, which meant it didn't really make sense. Then that got banned for not making sense a few hours later. So they basically just straight up banned a workers' wage motion to be brought to conference floor. DSYP on the first day, like organized about 50 people to march to the standing orders bit, and like we were discussing it with them, but it didn't really go very far. I think there's a few interviews with DSYP members about that online. I think Owen Jones covered it. Then at the end of the day, we were going to, after the proceedings were finished, we were going to do a mass march up to the chair and like ask ask the chair for a workers' wage motion to be considered, or at least why, give an acceptable reason why it wasn't allowed to be discussed by conference. And basically security and stewards, as we were grouping ourselves to make this march after conference had ended, started pushing us up against the wall and pushing us, to spread out further against the wall. And a few of us got closer to the conference, the conference stage. And that's where things got really hairy, where I think they probably thought that we were just about to run up and storm the stage, which was never the plan at any point. And basically they kept the conference going longer having a discussion on a party name, which I mean, whatever, and then snuck the chair out so that didn't happen. And then one of the members of our CEC had a conversation with Carrie Murphy, which on the next day didn't really go anywhere. So what we did afterwards is different factions. I mean, to be fair to them, I think Socialist Alternative and Dem Block did make speeches on the workers' wage, and we had one person from DSYP make a very strong speech on explaining the process behind how workers' wage being kept off of the proceedings. Yeah, and I mean that's about as much as we could accomplish, really.
One question I had was actually, why did Sultana boycott the first day of the conference? What was the
Yeah,
deal with that, and like how did that get received, like kind of on the conference floor?
yeah. So when she went with. So first of all, the banning of the SWP was brought up, but she also, as part of her entourage, brought someone, a councillor called James Giles, who's got quite a big profile and is kind of respected as a bit of a elections nerd. If you see him in person, he looks a bit like a teddy bear in a suit. He doesn't look like a very scary guy at all. I think Carrie Murphy picked him out and said he wasn't allowed in for whatever reason. I'm not saying there would, why. And she boycotted because he was part of her entourage, as far as I understand it. And and maybe he wasn't sorted. I've no idea why he wasn't allowed in, but at the same time, all the people um that the sort of on the collective side of things were allowed to be there at conference because they all had volunteer roles at conference, whether it was like the right chairs that they wanted to promote, whether it's as stewards. Alan Gibbons, who was on the collective secretariat, he was like lead of security for the stewards, and he said on Twitter that he needed to be sorted to go there. He already knew he'd be there because he was head of security,
Right.
and yet Zara wasn't allowed James to be accompanied by James Giles, basically.
Yeah, that does kind of, that's a little ridiculous, but I just wonder though. So like the on the ground floor, how did people kind of feel about Zara boycotting? Or was that like well received, or just?
I think. Yeah, sorry, go on, Charlie.
Yeah, I think it was largely expected from. So at this point was in the the SUP, the Socialist Unity Platform fringe event, is where I was sort of 10 minutes walk away, and we were having discussions throughout the day about sort of these major questions of what the party should be doing, what with sort of the size of this sort of left fringe was shrinking and growing throughout the day, depending on what was going on. But I think when we heard in that room that Zara had been had decided not to attend, I think people just shrugged largely, and kind of we got back to sort of discussing politics in a room that kind of where we had the conference on like a live stream, and then largely sort of disengaged when you can kind of guess what you've heard of the arguments for. The sort of level of debate was because the floor couldn't decide what was spoken about. We'd all read the standing orders, read what was going to happen, and you can guess. And sometimes someone might text and say there's a good speech coming, or a good speech just happened, and you can check what happened. But a lot of it eventually, because of the way it was operated, because the fact that the room actually had no power or authority anyway, it's theatre. It was a rally that you had to that you might get picked to speak at if you managed to flash your phone torch enough at the chair.
I don't think it came up much on conference floor because just dealing with all these weird processes ourselves. But yeah.
So I guess it's worth talking about how the conference itself went. So there's actually a clip I want to play of our this is our good friend Jack Conrad over here.
We're all going to be kicked out. All the left is going to be kicked out.
And by the left, we mean like trot groups.
Well, I'm not a Trotskyist.
Okay, sorry.
We're all going.
So my understanding is that all the left groups and Trotskyist and Nazist, as they say, did not get kicked out, but there was a whitelist, or
Yes.
So can you explain how the Congress ended up deciding on that?
Yeah, so the options we were given with this A motion or B motion of a full ban on dual membership, or the option of a whitelist that's overseen by the CEC. There's a slight issue that I mean, the CEC doesn't exist, so theoretically the whitelist doesn't exist either. So technically, I think they could, and I don't think they would after the amount of backlash to the SWP ban, but they could ban all anyone from any national political party. And that's the other thing, that they didn't define national political party because John Rees from Counterfire had asked Jeremy Corbyn, who they know each other through the Stop the War coalition, whether Counterfire would be banned. But the Corbyn said no, they're not unless they're registered in with the Electoral Commission, which they're not, but the SWP aren't either. So it's an arbitrary rule. The whitelist doesn't exist. But effectively, yeah, we could. People could be banned for being members of RS21, which has never run any candidates in the elections. It doesn't even have party in its name. It's about as much of a party as like the National Trust. But you know, it's like we don't know. So we're in this sort of limbo where we're relying on the bureaucracy not throwing us out.
Yeah, it's important to emphasise the SWP has never run. It's not registered with the Electoral Commission, and it's never run candidates as the SWP. They've always been independents. And Michael Lavalette from Counterfire was also banned as well, but not Counterfire as a whole. So it's just this strange situation.
And what would you say to people who would like argue that, like, oh, but these Trotskyist sects, you know, like SWP, you know, they've done horrible things and they're bureaucratic and anti-democratic, and you just don't want them like messing around in the early stages of an org like this because they'll just kind of muck things up and ruin it, basically? Because I saw a lot of that as a result. A lot of people were justifying this ban on those grounds, basically, because of the Comrade Delta case, which was very bad, and just because of how SWP is basically a bureaucratic sect, you know.
I mean, I would largely agree with them. I think the SWP have shown themselves to not be up to the task of building a mass democratic party. They have, acted horrifically in the recent past. They're a bureaucratic centralist organization who are more interested in building their sect than they are in building a party. But they're also one of the largest groups, one of the largest far-left groups in Britain. I'd argue there's a difference between the membership and the leadership in these organizations. We want a lot of ex-SWP people are really valued and activists and great organizers and things, and we want those people to be exposed to a properly democratic and vibrant organization. I think that would go some way in actually undermining the appeal of the SWP, who are very visible on through their fronts like Stand Up to Racism. They're known for doing things. So if we do things in a better way, then those people who want to do things should come to us. And also, banning the SWP doesn't mean the SWP aren't there. It just means the SWP aren't there openly as the SWP.
Yeah.
And that's a bureaucratic purge doesn't actually get rid of any sort of. It doesn't really get rid of the opponents. It drives them underground whilst also legitimizing their sort of dangerous ideologies, and also the fact that yes, it's the SWP now, but it's any other sort of opponent of the bureaucrats later. So I think there's a few different reasons why the SWP should be defended, and I think they should be out organized rather than out bureaucratized.
Yeah, I say the same thing about, say, for example, PSL, for example, in the US today with regards to DSA. But yeah, no, I agree completely there. So I think the other big issue at the conference was collective leadership. And so I guess maybe could you speak to how that vote went and what that means for your party?
Yeah, collective leadership was one of the major campaign points for democratic socialists, and we pushed it very hard in all the organizing we've been talking about. It's been one of the main things that we've pushed, and I mean other socialist organizations will have as well, but I think that DSYP has had the most clarity about it, and I think that's the same for the factions as well, and in terms of our constitutional vision as well. But so we managed to just get it over the line. It was about 48-52, another sort of like Brexit referendum kind of result. But it's a very weird situation because we lost quite badly on regional regional CEC, or Central Executive Committee, which means that all the elections, which will be by STV for the collective leadership, will be for these different regions. So there'll only be about 1 to 3 people for these different things, which means it's going to be quite close to a first past the post system for getting people onto the collective leadership. That means that not a, it'll be difficult for all the different tendencies and factions within your party to get representation at a national level and represent all the different viewpoints of the lay membership of your party. It's going to mean that there's going to be a lot more politicking over getting representation onto the CEC as well. It's going to be harder for the far left to run to the left of but possibly the soft left of your party, if that makes sense. you know yeah, but at the same time, even though it wasn't like a complete victory for us, it was like a very bad loss for the Corbyn camp at the same time, because they're not going to have unilateral control over your party through Jeremy Corbyn, and also because of how conference went and how delegitimized they were by all the cutting of the mic nonsense that happened on the live stream as well. They're not necessarily confident about the future of your party at this moment. So it's we're in a very weird situation where we're unhappy about what your party looks like, and the Corbyncrats are unhappy as well. So yeah.
I think there's for example, the online voters decided to keep online voting, strangely. So there's another sort of I think I see as major loss for the left, when you actually have to win the battle of ideas rather than win the battle of the mailing list. But the collective leadership thing, I think, was an error on the part of the organizers to control the outcome of the election of the votes, because the major debate going into the conference wasn't between a collective leadership model or an individual leadership model. It was between leadership or co-leadership. They didn't give the option of co-leadership, which is the thing that Zara Sultana had been arguing for going into the conference. And I think they assumed that she would then pivot to the single leadership and then challenge for the leadership at a later date. This is all speculation on my part, to be honest with you, but we've seen that I think they were trying to sort of define the parameters of giving this collective leadership thing as sort of potentially ridiculous notion that of being run by a Politburo, and whereas actually the calamity that had followed Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, like in their engagement with each other, I think the vast majority of onlookers said, look, we can't have one or the other running the party without both of them being sort of without both of them having that eventual responsibility, which then led, and as well as the arguments that we've been making for collective leadership all the way through, which also partly comes down to sort of making sure that ensuring the party is properly multi-tendency, and ensuring that there's that democratic and consistent democratic engagement and things. But eventually, yeah, that collective leadership won out through partly through co-leadership being taken off of the table.
You know, I thought that was interesting because as a Yank who was following the conference by social media, one of the things that I think was really that people found really confusing was I guess the normies, as it were, was the collective leadership resolution. I saw a lot of people sort of expressing the idea of like, well, then who decides? Like, then how did things get decided? Which isn't really a problem, obviously, but this is sort of the popular consciousness at work here. And just to engage in my own speculative thinking here is, I think that the debate about collective leadership versus a single leader was actually more so about the question about forming government than anything else. It seems to be to me that that's really what people were worried about in terms of that, whether a party founded on collective leadership would be able to form a government, would be able to, you know, actually take power, form a government in that sense. And I actually kind of want to ask you what, you know, what people are thinking about in terms of your party. Should the aim be to form a government? Should that be what the project is for your party eventually?
So I'll let Brian come on the second question there. But first point, I think you're spot on that people equate a political party with parliament so heavily that they couldn't a lot of people just couldn't comprehend that, hold on a second, how is your leader, the leader of your party is the leader in parliament, and that's the leader of the party
Right.
when you win a government. Obviously, when you look at even like the Scottish National Party have a parliamentary lead and a party lead. The leader of the Green Party isn't an MP, but probably, you know, it has been historically, and there's a co-leadership model has been an option there as well. But yeah, I think a lot of the resistance to the push for collective leadership that we've seen we've been having to make the argument that actually the leader of the party having a constituency that they're responsible for gives them a mandate that is separate to and outside of the party itself, which actually is bad for the party as a whole, because they're then bound to what they're able to get through with their constituents. So, if anything, separating out the party function from the parliamentary function is absolutely essential if we're going to build an actual democratic party. But yeah, Bryce, I'll let you talk about the question of forming governments.
Yeah, yeah, and I also think that by having to convince a group of people, that does strengthen your arguments and skills as a leader, because there will be like a couple of spokespeople that will come out, or, you know, leaders in the group that will drive things, but they will have to actually be able to make the argument for why they want things to go in a set direction, which is why I prefer that. On forming a government, I think Zara, actually, one of the things she said has been spot on. She said that it's going to be a, you know, like a 10, 20, 50 year. No, I don't think she said 50 year actually. But she said it would be a 10, 20 year project of building your party. And that struck me, like, it seemed like a remark that came straight from one of Marx's remarks to like the First International, arguing that in order to prepare themselves for government, the working class needs to build themselves over like 10, 20, 50 years of, you know, strife and, you know, I mean, he said civil wars. I hope not that. But yeah, I think this sort of building this project is a long-term project in, you know, building power in our communities, in the trade unions, in the movements, building the organised power of the working class, and building a party that can actually oppose the British state, that, you know, is going along with climate change, is has been assisting, you know, Israel in its genocide of the Palestinian people, whether it's selling F-35 parts to it, or whether it's you know, actually surveilling Gaza with its spy planes, whether it's implementing austerity because it has no idea about how to get investment into public infrastructure or things like that. And I don't think any political class or any class, any ruling class in Britain has any idea about how to run the state, basically, because it just seems like managed decline these days. You know, so this slow project of building a long-term project around creating a democratically planned economy is what we need right now. And I mean, Zara's saying that, but yeah, that's what we need.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Bryce. Like the sort of long-term orientation that folks have, and I think it's sensible for folks to look at some of the messiness of these proceedings, some of the undemocratic maneuvers leading up to and during the conference, and say, to be a little dismayed about the prospects of the organization. But I think, when you look at it in the long term, and when you look at it, I think from your perspective, I think that you shared, Charlie, around how like there isn't really a culture of democratic participation in the left nowadays. Like, I think it becomes clear that like, we need to move through that kind of mess, and like these things are not going to be perfect and straightforward. Like, we're not trying to replicate kind of a sect model. Like, you guys are trying to build something democratic, and that's like necessarily going to be messy, and like, people aren't going to know how exactly to participate. And like the project of the left is really to like create that culture, create those structures that can bring people in for the fight in the long haul. So, for the folks listening to this in the UK or in the US, I would encourage you not to be too dismayed about the prospects, and, show up the next day and, get involved and continue this kind of struggle, because it's not going to happen overnight. I think I read an article in Jacobin, I think, that was somewhat critical of the proceedings of the conference, sort of the criticism of like, oh, this conference was way too inward looking, and, why don't we just go back to kind of mass politics, blah, 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 campaigning, etc. But I think that does miss the point that you all hit on around like, the long-term vision and the need to kind of like develop a democratic structure and a democratic organization. So maybe on that point, looking forward, looking into, action, participation, like, Bryce, Charlie, like, what do you view as some of the, the organizing opportunities? Like, how can folks get involved? What are the things that you're excited about, in the next year or two?
So personally, I'm concerned about the party. I think the online, I think digital democracy, online voting, online and plebiscites, I do think it makes the organizing reality very difficult. I think it undermines the individual branches being a site of struggle, because they're just ultimately avoided when it comes to the actual sort of sending the power doesn't come from the bottom up properly. The power is to set a question. But what I do think is quite exciting is I think the Democratic Socialist Your Party group and campaign has been a revelation for a lot of the sort of for partyist politics on the left in Britain, which just didn't, it needed this sort of thing to be able to build a group that it coheres and unites around a program, rather than uniting around either theory or tactics. There's different ranges and different scales that we're operating at. But I think the thing that we're looking, or at least I'm personally curious about in DSYP, is do we then want us to is that the organ? Is that the vehicle? We've got. Do we build a more sort of robust democratic culture and carry on intervening in your party, but also potentially look at the Green Party if we want to go to these sort of instinctive left wingers, these instinctive sort of people who identify as socialists but don't realize that doesn't mean just sort of like voting for a socialist party. That's there's a certain sort of level of caderization that's needed as well. And do we then, and inside DSYP, we're going to be having those questions we're asking those questions at some point of like, what do we do next? Do we just remain within your party, or do we then sort of have a wing within the Greens as well? Is that then cohered within a broader organization of the DSB or something, you know? Can we have this multi-tendency thing that operates within different political parties? So I'm not entirely sure that your party has the reach that it needed, and has the internal structures it needed to do that. But it could do one day.
Yeah, to give a little bit of a defense for organizing within your party as well, is that, you know, this is the first time in decades that different sections of the left are talking with each other as well. And, you know, I think the stronger argument for it, rather than being a left populist party, was always like this left unity project, which the dual carding has really damaged. But you know, I still think sections of the left are still engaging with it. There's still organising happening in terms of setting up these local branches, and it might be the case that DSYP does need to change tack, have a rethink, and organise in a different way. Our main focus was to organise for founding conference. Yeah, but I don't think your party is dead quite yet. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's dead. I think some people, they wanted a tightly managed stage show where Jeremy Corbyn was going to announce his, new party, and it was going to be this exciting new thing. And instead it was kind of messy. They wanted a tightly organized stage show, but instead it was improvisation. We're doing jazz here. It's a little messy, it's a little confusing, it's not exactly listenable at all points, but this is how we're doing it. This is how we're getting the show on the road. And it's not going to be easy. And that's politics. It's messy.
Yeah, well, hopefully having to organise against all of this is almost like clarifying in its own way. Hopefully,
Oh
if
yeah.
if they had been more competent, if Corbyn and Collective had been more confident and announced it earlier, or not had a big bust up with Zara Sultana and just sort of accepted what she was doing, they would have been so popular that they would have dwarfed any other kind of faction because of the goodwill for Corbyn. So
Exactly.
now like a new cadre can finally train itself in struggle and like learn these like political lessons.
Yeah, and I mean, there really is a desperate need for a principled left party in your country right now, because you see the rise of this anti-immigrant nationalism and these like nationalist rallies that are happening, and the economy is going to shit. The Labor Party is just completely atrocious. So there is a desperate need for some kind of political leadership in these moments, but it's not going to come out of nowhere. It's not going to magically appear. It's only going to develop through hard work and through political struggle.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well. There's no sort of shortcut to it. It's not going to, and we've seen that things like the Stop the War movement after Iraq, the sort of the Stance Racism sort of SWP fighting the far right. it doesn't replace the sort of the patient work of organization, of building a party, of winning the arguments,
right,
struggle and stuff, and turning those individual sort of workplace struggles into a broader political struggle. And it doesn't replace that. And I think there's been a sort of either a sect or a movement, whereas actually, yeah, I think people are realizing now it is time for a party.
Exactly. So I think we're getting to a good point to end things and to come to a close. But actually had an interesting comment over here. So apparently the anti-Corbyn pressure group Labor Against Anti-Semitism has filed a complaint against your party to the Electoral Commission. So there's a chance it will be forced to choose a better name. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I think the second most chosen name at the conference. Again, this one of those things, one of the stitch ups. The four names we were given were all terrible. Our party, For the Many, or the Popular Alliance. I think Popular Alliance was the second most chosen. The issue is it's not an alliance, and it's certainly not popular right now. So I'm not really sure how we're supposed to justify that one. But yeah, I think there's I think Zara Sultana was told this on the radio this morning, and she hadn't heard that there was a complaint going to the Electoral Commission. It's quite funny to see her reaction.
So, Joseph, Jack, any final questions for our guests before we end things or close things out?
Just a big thank you to you both and to all the comrades in DSYP, Marxist Unity Caucus, RS21, all the partyists out there in the UK, fighting for the left party that we desperately need in the UK. So big thank you to you both for all of your work. Maybe my one question would be like, is there anything you guys want to plug? Any publications or things coming up?
Mainly DSYP and Prometheus mostly. And I mean, if you're in Britain, join DSYP and RS21 and Muck. I think, yeah.
Yeah, took the words out of my mouth. Thank you guys for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. This was very informative. I think our audience will learn a lot from this, and I know I learned a lot. Actually, I think I definitely understand what's going on in the UK left a bit better, and so I think triumph or fiasco. I think something in between. Cautious optimism may perhaps be warranted, but again, thank you for our guest, and I'm gonna end the stream there.